2016 rather, you can see the kind of work that the Green Party has been doing historically. And, Dr. West has been doing wonderful work, but he really hasn't been part of the party building work. Why would he? He wasn't a Green and hasn't been a Green, and kind of only joined because we were his rescue from the trouble with the People's Party. So, he's not informed actually about this history. And I know that when you're in a party, you have to debate stuff all the time. You have to justify your policy positions. Greens are a small D Democratic Party. We have a diversity of opinion about all the controversial issues, and you're going to be challenged on them. And I think that was hard on someone who was new to the party to have to defend your stance on, everything, everything across the board. And I think that might have been a very significant driver for why this process was not comfortable for him. And as far as Bill Fletcher's, I actually heard that interview and I saw him move the goalpost as you responded to his critique. He kept moving the goalpost, which says to me that, he has a job. He has a job to try to defend the Democratic Party from a so-called lefty point of view. And it's impossible to do now. It really can't be done. And how do you critique genocide and endless war from inside the Democratic Party? And they're trying somehow to do it, and they keep going, jumping through bigger and bigger hoops, or should I say higher and higher hoops all the time. And it gets more difficult. But like he was saying, we only come out every 4 years to run for president. Well, actually, we've had over 1,000 people in office at the local and state level over 20 years or 15 years, whatever, that we've been running candidates. In the last, I think it was the last municipal cycle, we had something like 140 people either elected or reelected, and we have a rather high rate of winning those elections at the local level. And we do that in spite of an incredibly tilted playing field. And if you think the Green Party is weak, just look at every other independent, non-corporate party that has ever existed. In my lifetime, they are all wiped off the map, and they all have been. And you can even go back to the socialist parties in the early 1900s. They were all wiped off the map because they held office at the state and national level. They had a couple of representatives, at least to Congress as well. I believe also a governor, and they were extremely influential, and they were knocked off when the ballot access rules were changed in order to protect Democrats and Republicans from competition. And it was part of the Red Scare, which is also part of that kind of uber principle of protecting power holders and deep pockets from any kind of political challenge. So yes, it's a struggle, but you can look at the socialist parties. They were national. Now they've been beaten back to just a city council here and there. Or look at the Peace and Freedom Party, which at one point had ballot access maybe to 17 or 15 states, something like that. It might have even been more. I think that was in like the late 60s or the 70s. And they've been beaten back now to one state. So between the smear campaigns, the media blackout, the vilification, the criminalization, and the ballot access hurdles, the exclusion from debates, it's all part of a grand system for silencing competition. This is not what democracy looks like. And, this is a very critical fight, and a lot of people are waking up to it because the Greens have experience fighting this fight. And I should mention also the Citizens Party, which was the first environmental party that was established in like the 1960s. It lasted for 2 cycles, and that's it. Or the party that, what's his name? The guy who ran initially as an independent, the businessman. At any rate, who?
Not Dean Phillips in this cycle?
No, this was like back in
Bloomberg?
Ross Perot. Yes, thank you. Okay. Yes, this was Ross Perot. And he founded a party. He was probably the most successful independent candidate. He founded a party which lasted for 1 cycle. We're always seeing people who are newcomers to the process think, oh, I can do this. And they found a party, and then the party is over and done with. in one or two cycles. And I kind of see Cornell, having the same, kind of cycle here, thinking that, oh, I'll found a party. Well, easier said than done. And people who criticize the Greens saying, oh, you haven't, changed the world. Well, actually, it's pretty world changing simply to be surviving to fight another day. And as we do so, we get stronger. And we've been ahead of the curve on the Green New Deal, on abolishing student debt, on free higher education, even Medicare for All, which was made a national issue by Ralph Nader as a Green in 2000. We have really set the progressive agenda. And we've always been ahead of the curve. I was ridiculed for advocating to abolish student debt, by John Oliver. Thank you very much. And, and, we've been ahead of the curve, but the curve has caught up to us big time. And a lot of people are getting religion now about breaking away from the parties of war on Wall Street for a very good reason.
So that's why I think it is so frustrating. I mean, you would think that we had learned, and I think many of us did learn a lesson about the utility or the likelihood of success of running within the Democratic Party. We learned something about the value. I would think we had learned something about the value of the Green Party and ballot access. And in fact, when Dr. West went from MPP to Green Party, I think there was a little collective sigh of relief where it's like, okay, many more of us will get an opportunity to vote for him. As someone we admire and whose politics we really respect and whose courage we really respect. And so then the move to independent seemed curious as well. I mean, there were some polls that indicated there could be some upsides. Polls suggested that voters were very inclined, much more inclined to vote for an independent candidate than a Green Party candidate. But of course, as you pointed out, someone like RFK Jr., who has a multi-million-dollar war chest, can take advantage of those polls and be on the ballot at the same time because they have the money potentially to make that happen. And even that is an uphill battle, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't clear what the strategy was going to be from Dr. West's perspective. Although I will speak for myself, I was rooting for him. I'm obviously hopeful. I was hopeful that whatever he was thinking would work out. But now this move to starting one's own party seems to be a reflection of our suspicions being validated, that it just is too difficult to get on the ballot. And so then it does start to feel like, well, we're rooting for you, we adore you, but is this on some level kind of wasting voters' time, energy, and potentially money at a time when so many former Bernie donors and voters basically have decided we're not going to support any of these campaigns financially or really with our time either, because we feel like we were so burned by his ultimate capitulation to endorsing Joe Biden. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just saying it feels like not surprising and therefore almost doubly disappointing to see this new shift. Although, of course, I'm not naysaying. I'm not yucking anybody's yum. I hope it works. I'm always hopeful.
Yes. What can I say? I think the proof is in the pudding and will continue to be in the pudding. And I think given history being what it is, it's important to look at where you are and not, it's like, what do you do? Not what you say, it's what you do. And where is the ballot access struggle? Greens have always done it. And our campaigns have been very successful. I think in 2012, which was a first time for us, we were on in maybe 42 or 43 states. But then our second time through in 2016, we were on in 47 states, and the states where we weren't on were very low population states. So in both of those elections, we could have won the election. So we could be, in each of those cases, we were a real threat to empire. And in the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. You must be that threat, you must be that demand if you are going to either win the race or move the needle because you are a force to contend with. We have to be that. I think it's really important to have principled and inspired voices, which Dr. West and Claudia de la Cruz definitely are, and other lefty candidates very much are. And they're valuable. They're valuable in the race as well. But I think it's important for people to be strategic about what is actually going to be a threat, and which is going to make empire quake in its boots and move empire, move its positions, or replace empire. And I wouldn't rule that out, given the really unprecedented position that Americans are in right now, really the whole world is in, where the need for deep change has never been so profound, and the possibility of actually realizing that change has never loomed so large as it is now.
Yeah, I think you're really identifying something very, very true about this political moment seeming very ripe an opportunity for alternative candidates, for outsider candidates. Not just because of the state of the world, but because there's polarization happening on lines that are not represented by either major party. So you have a significant group of sort of America First voters who are frustrated with military spending in Ukraine. There are people who are both America First folks and also who are kind of principled objectors who are very frustrated about military spending in Israel that's being used to facilitate what the ICJ has called a plausible genocide. RFK Jr. for a while seemed to be really capitalizing on a cohort of the public that was very frustrated about COVID era policy and mixed messaging out of the Biden administration as to what was medically indicated for various interventions, some of which I would argue is more legitimate, some of which wasn't. Frustrated also about the weird silencing around lab leak origin and whether that could be a plausible theory of the start of COVID. In addition to being interested in his critique of the CIA and the FBI and deep power and all of these kinds of things. And yet the mainstream candidates have none of that. Trump, Biden, unity of interest with respect to military spending. Biden's COVID policies are basically Trump's COVID policies, except for Biden actually ended the student debt moratorium that Trump had put in place, and on and on and on. And it does seem to me that the failure, the failure of Marianne's candidacy from taking off was largely because she also didn't seem to align with the gap that independent voters are looking for here. And I would say the same of, well, it's a little bit different with Dean Phillips, but he has his own struggle. And so I want to give you an opportunity to sort of make your pitch, because it does really seem to me, not just because of ballot access issues, but because of what you actually stand for and what the Green Party actually stands for. You are the candidate that so many people think RFK Jr. is, and have the politics, a lot of the politics that people are really attracted to with RFK Jr., except that you're not a massive hypocrite with respect to Israel, and also don't have some of the more controversial, shall I say, aspects of some of his takes. So often, I think third-party candidates are asked to talk about strategy and are very rarely given an opportunity to talk about policy. So I want to open up the floor for you to say some things about what you're actually running on that are still really important to so many American voters, whether it's healthcare, student debt, economy, what have you.
I think, across the board, we are really the one campaign that is a pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide, climate action campaign. And you can look at each of those issues, and we are the one option. If we're not on the ballot, there will not actually be a vigorous pro-worker policy. And that holds for climate as well, and also for the war, and just to start there, it's clear there's not much daylight between Biden and Trump on Israel. Likewise, on Ukraine, although Trump sometimes says we wouldn't be in this trouble, but in terms of actual policies, there's nothing that he would be doing differently. And, and he has supported more funding for Ukraine. And, there's not much difference between them on Ukraine. And likewise, they're both warmongering against China. So, they're extremely dangerous. RFK has presented himself as though he's an anti-war candidate. But to believe that, you have to think that war in the Middle East is not important or dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. We're currently bombing 3 countries in order to protect Israel's right to conduct genocide. We are attacking Iran, not on its own territory, but around Iran, and that could also be extremely provocative. Iran now has a mutual defense pact with Russia, and this could become a nuclear conflict. It could spin out of control. This has all the makings of a World War I type catastrophe, and there is not daylight between Trump and Biden on this. They've both been creatures of AIPAC. Biden has taken millions and millions of dollars from AIPAC, and Trump, spoke at, I think, their convention some years back and said that there was no daylight between AIPAC and him. So they are both extremely dangerous and do not have a claim whatsoever to being anti-war candidates, of course. But RFK is in the same boat on the Middle East, and the Middle East is not like some incidental thing. It's huge, and it could explode. And simply to be, apologizing for and advocating genocide is pretty jaw-dropping. I think many of his supporters would have great pause if they knew what the reality was here on that. So I've seen many of his supporters back out once the Middle East started to flare up. And my guess is that that's going to be a bigger deal. You can also look at issues around civil liberties and censorship, and the fact that RFK has basically weighed in for censorship and for very harsh repression of Palestinian rights advocates on campus with their basically blacklisting for life. It's pretty staggering. And for him to have, supported Bill Ackman's contention that any anti-Zionist is basically attacking Jews and threatening Jews, and it needs to be dealt with harshly, especially on campus. For RFK to be weighing in, and I think he has a lot of money that's coming from them. He's held fundraisers recently with some of the central figures, including the wife of Sheldon Adelson. So, there's not much secret, and he who claims to be a spokesperson for democracy, don't look at what I do. Don't look at my super PAC. Don't look at the fact that my super PAC, half of it is funded by two individuals with very deep pockets. So I want campaign finance reform. So therefore, don't look at what I do, look at what I say. I don't think that really holds water, especially among his supporters who tend to be skeptical and they kind of want to see the proof. So I think he's in a very precarious situation right now. So I sort of addressed kind of war issues. If you look at climate issues, I actually don't know what RFK's climate positions are. I haven't seen him take a bold stand. I haven't seen him, endorse the Green New Deal. I haven't seen him call for an end to all new fossil fuel infrastructure. I haven't seen him do any of that stuff. And I must say that the Democratic and Joe Biden position on the climate is mostly hot air, no pun intended, and BS. Because if you actually dig behind the headlines, they're trying to take credit now for putting a pause on Biden's horrific policy of approving 22 LNG plants, which are underway. The Sierra Club itself put out a report saying that those approvals amount to 440 new coal plants. 440. It will knock back all progress on climate emissions back to the year 2005. And so they've put a pause on that now because they've been forced to, but they approved it in the first place. It was their FERC that kind of gave it the go-ahead. So it's a little bit bass-ackward, so to speak, to be claiming credit for stopping a horrible thing that they instigated. And why were we building all these new LNG plants? Because Biden had either blown up the Nord Stream pipeline or had given the thumbs up for blowing it up, which then created this huge new LNG export market. So it's all extremely, it's like Barack Obama's all of the above. They've basically continued that. And, Biden continues to leave Trump in the dust on fossil fuel production, on the extraction and devastation of public lands, all of that. I mean, the track record is just full of broken promises and BS. So whatever issue you look at, it can get to be very hard to say which one is the greater evil and which one is the lesser evil now. And I think it's really important to forget the lesser evil and fight for the greater good. Our lives literally depend on this. And I think, it's all of these are great subjects for debate, and we have a lot to say about it. And all sorts of formats are opening up right now, including that I've been invited to the Libertarian Convention in California and in New York to have this discussion. So I'm very excited.
Oh, wonderful. I'll have to see if Robbie's going, and then maybe I'll agree to go with him on one of these things. He's constantly traveling for libertarian events. They must have deep pockets, because they're always getting him to go somewhere. Yeah. And maybe if you were there, I'd be willing to tag along.
Oh, that'd be really
Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.